Good morning. I'd like to thank Janine again and all of the people who've made EDICON what it is today. How many of you were at EDICON last year and attended Scott McMorrow's plenary keynote speech, Bet Your Job? All right. Doesn't really matter whether you were or you weren't, but I'm going to riff on what Scott started. And to do that, I want to go right back to the very beginning. First principles. So why do you go to work? It is because you like traffic. Sitting in traffic is the key motivator for going to work, isn't it? No? Could it be that you love cubicles? Look at this environment. Look at the flora and fauna, the fine art, the music that you get to listen to. No one could tell you that this isn't better than walking around a forest or a beach, right? Cubicles, that's why you go to work. No? Maybe. I like a nice cubicle. Or could it be money? Well, we often think it's money, and certainly while you're sitting in traffic or walking into the cubicle maze, you think to yourself, yeah, they pay me, right? But that's not actually why you go to work. You are skilled individuals who make a great deal of money compared to almost everyone else on earth. You do not go to work for money. Sure, you wouldn't go to work if they weren't giving you money, but, so what do you really need? Money. What's money to you? All you need is a couple of pounds of food a day, somewhere safe to sleep, human companionship, and some occupational activity that gives you a sense of accomplishment. You have to have these four things, and more or less in that order as well. Without these, you will either go crazy or die, probably both. And this companionship, your interactions with the other people in your family and your colleagues at work, this is where you build most of your values. Your values come from your interactions with human beings, right? I wrote this book on neuroscience and I learned tons and stuff about it, and I just can't help but share these. These really are first principles for the human experience. Now, what we're really here about is this sense of accomplishment, why we go to work. And corporations exist in order to enable you to innovate and get that sense of accomplishment. So, why do you work for a corporation? Let me make the case. And it is because corporations provide the stuff you need so that you can contribute, innovate, get that sense of accomplishment, and change the world, whether a little or a lot. Equipment, colleagues to collaborate with, all of it, right down to medical insurance, and the all-powerful illusion of security, provided that you keep your end of the bargain. The bargain is this: in exchange for the corporation's support, you agree to further the goals of the corporation, which brings us to three cases. At its best, your goals and the corporation's goals align, so that you are pursuing your goals and they align with the corporation's goals. So this bargain is natural. It's a symbiotic interaction between you and your employer. At its most mediocre, and I hope not at its most common, you go to work, it's mostly boring. Sometimes you get an interesting thing, they pay you, and so you can goof off when you're, on the weekends. Not so bad. But at its worst, your values and those of the corporation contradict each other. And so in order to make money, you have to betray your values. That's the worst case. We are going to go through them now. So, an environment for innovation. There are small companies, like here's Dave and Bill's garage, right? And there's Dave and Bill walking into it. And this is Dave and Bill's other garage, right? Somewhat larger. The opportunities are different in small companies and large companies. In small companies, you have a greater impact on what's going on, but you have less support. At huge companies, you have a lot of support, maybe too much sometimes. But you get a lot of support, and if you do it right, if you bet your job, you can have a big impact on the company and make sure that your goals and their goals are being forwarded. Innovation. So we know a few things about innovation. The most important thing we know about innovation is it occurs when people apply skills that they have learned from one field to another field. That's lateral thought. Literally, It's literally lateral thought in your brain where you take one network, one pattern recognition network, and make connections with another pattern recognition network. And here are some examples, some famous examples: Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, Ben Franklin. All of them had a wide variety of interests, brought them together, and made great innovations. These were great lateral thinkers. And this quote from Mark Tucker here is one of my favorites. And if you spend your whole life in one silo, if you only do one thing, then probably, in most cases, you will make innovations the first 3 or 4 years of your career. You might do some really cool stuff. But after that, being embedded in this one silo, you're more likely to make incremental improvements in whatever you're working in. You could probably have a much greater impact if you switch fields, whether it's a big switch or a small switch within one company or among others. But that's an easy way to crank up your innovation, productivity. So let me define lateral thought for you very quickly. It's really simple. Here's Galileo. He had an innovation. He probably didn't invent the telescope, but let's just pretend like he did because he was punished for it. But ground lenses had been around for a long time. Magnifying lenses had existed for a long time, but they were only good for magnifying things close up. The great process of lateral thought was thinking, hey, I could take 2 lenses and hold them up together. One of them defocuses and the other focuses, and then I can look up here in a telescope. This is lateral thought. Sounds pretty simple, sounds pretty trivial, doesn't it? Yeah, but he discovered that that certain moons orbited around Jupiter. They didn't orbit around the Earth, and and then he was punished for that. The iPod, it's a hard drive with a user interface, people. How hard is this? There's, lateral thought, taking different pieces and forcing them together. The best example of lateral thought, the easiest one, is humor. When someone tells a joke, the premise is a fairly mundane story, and you probably would not pay attention for very long if you didn't smell a punchline coming. And then the fairly mundane story goes along, and then the punchline takes it in an absurd direction. The more ways you can interpret within the confines of the premise of the joke, the more way you can interpret, and the more absurd the punchline is, the more you laugh. That's literally lateral thought, connecting the dots of 2 different phenomena. The thing about innovation, though, is it breeds controversy. So I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote. It was 2003, my friend. I was working in North Dallas for Agilent Technologies. I was 4 years out of particle physics. I was a physics professor for many years before I went in to join you fine people in high tech. So I was 4 years out of it. I was an applications engineer, and Agilent was trying to sell the microwave transition analyzer for jitter analysis. Here's a picture of it. It weighed about 80 pounds. It consisted of these 3 things. It took about an hour to set up. And the product documentation for it said that this was a flexible, wide bandwidth jitter analysis system. It wasn't flexible for jitter analysis. I'm sure the old 71501C, the venerable piece of test and measure equipment, was extremely useful for many things, but not the kind of jitter analysis that was needed for 2.5 gigabit per second signals of its time, or what we do now, what we call jitter analysis now. So I took it in, tried to demo it, talked to some customers, and saw what they really needed, and then I called my boss. Now, I had a boss. My bosses at Agilent, everywhere I've been, I've had great bosses. Even when I hated them, I later realized how awesome they were. But I love this guy, Dave Critchley. Any of you ever work with Dave Critchley? He's up in the Northeast. I think he's retired now. But boy, so this is what happened. After I demoed this and realized how lame this was for that application, I called him. And at the time, I'm thinking, I can't sell this. What am I going to do? And I felt like I was, Agilent was a big company. And I felt like I was at the back of this great big container ship, right? Hanging onto the rudder, pulling it, just trying to move this giant ship just a little bit make a little change the corporation. My goals were perfectly aligned with those of the company, but the company didn't really know it. But they were, so I bet my job. I called my boss. Dave, yeah, no, I'm not selling that thing because it doesn't work. No, I am not going to betray the fine customers of this once solid company. No, if someone else tries to sell it, I'll tell the customers of this fine company that it sucks. Okay, then give me a few engineers and I'll make one myself. Well, then R&D ought to get their shit together. All right. Pointing out the obvious. Okay then, get every known jitter analyzer in one place. We'll build a calibrated jitter transmitter so that we know what jitter signals we're sending, and then we will test all of the existing jitter testers from every company and see which ones work. Hasn't this been done before? Could this be less obvious, Dave? And I said, well, I guess if you don't know if it hasn't happened, did you ask around? Of course I asked around. So he said, well, what do you need to build a calibrated jitter transmitter? That's why I need engineers to build it, man. I don't know, right? So good old Dave. He said, when I said, I don't need a bureaucrat. And then he talked to me for a while, and I said, yeah, okay. Yeah, I guess I do need a bureaucrat. Keep him out of my way. And I needed a bureaucrat as a sort of insulation between management and the engineering team because it was 2003, business was bad, and the only allowed business travel was for customer contacts. So it was against the company rules to try to do this. But Dave arranged it. Actually, the bureaucrat that he gave me, who was actually a really good engineer, but I thought of him as a bureaucrat, really good guy. We became very good friends. And so somehow a series of coincidences occurred where a bunch of people, some fine engineers, just coincidentally needed to be in Colorado Springs during the same week, and the company had to rent all the equipment of its competitors to put them all in one room, and we did it. And we did JitterFest, and jitter analysis was better for that from then on. And of course, Agilent benefited a lot, but all the other companies in high tech benefited too, except for one or two that suffered some because their jitter analysis capabilities couldn't keep up. But it worked, we did it, it was fun, we aligned. This was the best case. So what about when the bargain goes sour? When your goals no longer align with those of the corporation? Well then, you're not getting that sense of accomplishment. It's time to go. So you can move on in a lot of different ways, right? You can go from, my favorite job has always been as an individual contributor. I've led teams, I'm happy to lead teams, I like leading teams. But I really like doing the work myself. But you can change, right? You can take those skills and apply them somewhere else. I'm sure many of you have made the jump from being a real electrical engineer to being a manager, or even to, and I even put marketing as a demotion there, isn't that funny? We kid because we love. Or you can move within the company, get another job, or start your own business. So there I am. It was 2005. I'm in Santa Rosa. I'm working in Santa Rosa at this time. And the group I was working in at Agilent, the sampling scope group, was asked to reduce headcount by management. They asked for 3 volunteers in a group of 100. And I'm sitting there. Now, I've always been a writer. I've always wanted to write books. And writing has always been sort of the foundation of all the success I've had in my various careers as a physicist and as working in a startup and then working in test and measurement for Agilent, and certainly in my own business. And so there I was, sitting in traffic, and I was thinking to myself, they pay me to come to work, and now they want to pay me not to come to work. So I wondered if this was the chance that I was waiting for. This is an opportunity. Now, I've been planning for this opportunity, right? I was saving money to finance my ability to write books. Now, I didn't have close to what I figured I needed, but here it was. And they were going to pay me 6 months, and all my options were going to mature, or I was going to keep working. Well, I loved my job, but here was an opportunity. So, what do, right? Oh, this is a pretty good seat to be in. Worst case, I got to get another job in 6 or 7 months. I could probably get another job, I was thinking. I always worked at Jack in the Box. I like that. I could probably do that again. So I called Scott McMorrow. I didn't know Scott at the time, but I had heard of him. I knew that he was leading a consulting group. And Scott gave me a pep talk. He was honest, but he asked lots of probing questions about what my contacts were like. And, do you think I could be a consultant? What if I don't get any business? What if this? What if that? And finally, he did say that employment gives the illusion of security and self-employment gives the illusion of freedom. And we laughed, and then I went for it. I threw my hat in the ring. I figured 3 volunteers, there's got to be like 10 or 20 people thinking the same thing, right? There weren't. There were just 2 of us. 2 volunteers, and then they went and picked somebody who didn't want to be laid off. So I started this company, Ransom's Notes, in 2005. August 15th, 2005, we opened our bedroom door for business. Wait, that doesn't come out quite right, does it? Well, maybe in some way it does. So here's my staff, a picture of my staff here at their most productive, by the way, in the Ransom's Notes Executive Office Tower. So I made it 13 years doing this. The pay hasn't, the pay's been kind of mediocre. I did win the Earned Income Credit in 2011. The Earned Income Credit is the booby prize that the Internal Revenue Service gives you for not making money. So since then, I don't know, the very concept of lying on my taxes is foreign to me because, man, whoever's reading these, look what I did. This is so much better when I got the Earned Income Credit, isn't it? I have this image of this little IRS guy and a little, in the visor, and yeah, what's he doing this year? Oh, not bad. Oh, another tough year. But look what I got to do. I wrote a bunch of books. So I got to do something that's very important to me while doing those facets of high tech at which I am best. Instead of going to meetings, sitting in traffic, I get to do what I really care about. And it turns out, wasn't expecting this, that I actually really care about doing high tech too, that there's some balancing thing. That when I do too much of one and not enough of the other, I get uncomfortable. So that brings us to the first rule of self-employment. And I call this fear management, because you never really know how much business you're going to have in the future. And so it's difficult to say no. The only time I've ever really said no to somebody who wants me to work for them is when they've given me a time of delivery that I can't possibly make, which is totally honest, right? But other than that, when I don't have enough business, I'm worried about not making enough money. When I have too much business, or when I have a lot of business, I worry about not writing enough books. There's this crazy balancing thing. And among that is always centered around financial problems, which I have learned tend to exist, for those of us who are well-educated and reasonably well-adjusted, tend to exist in the future. And the future is a figment of your imagination. The second rule of self-employment is more important, because the problem with it is your boss is a jerk who follows you around all the time. Your boss knows everything you do, and when you're not working, he can be a little not very accommodating about it. So these are things you have to look out for. So the third case, when the bargain really goes sour, when the company starts to betray your values. Well, don't underestimate your ability to change the company you work for. Corporations are built of human beings. I don't think corporations are human beings, but they're not made up of dogs. Dogs aren't very productive. They're dogs. Corporations are made of human beings, so you can change them. It can be very difficult. Or you can change your values to make them align with the companies. Of course, that is a slippery slope. I would advise against that. But then something like this comes along. Maybe you hate your job because the company is doing things you don't believe in. But you have responsibilities, right? Maybe you have one of these things. They're expensive. They're actually not as expensive as you might think. Lots of poor people raise very good children, but still you want to care for them, and it's a responsibility you care for, and they grow up and you want to enrich them. Maybe they want to go into sports or art or music. Maybe they want to be in the marching band in high school. They're so cute at that age, aren't they? And then, they finish high school, right? And you know what comes next. Well, college. Who doesn't want their child to go to college? No one? You all want to pay that much money so that they can have these enriching, not just the education, but the enrichment of making friendships, bonds with people that they'll know forever. These kinds of connections are expensive, but people need this sort of thing to carry on their lives. That's my favorite picture of my daughter, by the way, there in the middle. Oh, Santa Cruz. But we do have responsibilities. You have responsibilities to pay your bills, to mow the lawn. You have responsibilities to recycle, to stop at stoplights, to wear your seatbelt, to floss your teeth. These are lowercase r responsibilities. You have a responsibility as a highly educated professional to pursue your greatest ambition, because you're going to be dead someday, and if you don't do it now, you probably never will. What a waste. So, the problem with responsibilities and bills and being in debt, which we all are, is that we tend to mix up our responsibilities. This is a Faustian bargain. A Faustian bargain is where you're willing to sacrifice anything for power. So, I ask you then. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but we start with this. It's probably not too hard for me to convince you that the world's economy is increasingly built on technology. And you, of course, are the people who build that technology. Now, an economy, the way that people spend their capital, the way that they spend their time and their money, and how they gather their world around them and arrange it, that's what an economy is. It is the visceral expression of cultural values, and you build the tools that back up culture. So, who's responsible for what you build and whether it works and how your products are used? The CEO of the corporation? No. Your boss? No. You know who it is. It's not marketing and sales. See, another jibe at marketing. Can't help it. Can't help it. The shareholders, they don't even know what you do. Come on. No. We all know who's responsible for what you do and the impact that it has on culture and society. It is up to us. We are responsible for civilization. And I have a picture here because when I was in France, every time I go to France, I just get so tickled that every public building has these 3 words on it: liberty, equality, fraternity. Freedom, equality, and brotherhood and sisterhood by implication. So we gotta watch out for civilization. And that brings us to the fundamental question. You only get one thing in life, and it is awareness moving through time. It's kind of a decaying form of awareness. This is a picture of a football stadium that holds, depending on how it's configured, between 55,000 and 65,000 people. 85 years is probably the top end of your productive lifespan. 85 years is about 31,000 days. So if you sat in a different seat in a football stadium every day of your life, you might be able to sit in half the seats. Time is running thin. No matter how old you are, you need to get to work. So, whether you want to save the world or sail around it, no matter what you want to do, whether you might want to help people, work in charity, feed the poor, care for them, maybe you want to sail around the world. Maybe you want a vineyard. Maybe you want to sit up and watch people pick grapes and enjoy nice wine. I don't care, but if you have passion for it, I want you to do it. Maybe you're spiritual and you want to experience, I don't know, I'm not spiritual, so I don't know what the hell they're doing. Maybe you want to go into politics to save the world. Let me tell you, right now, it's very difficult to think of a political figure that is not controversial. So I gave you a choice here. I got your conservative, your liberal, and your nut job. I'm covering all bases. All right. So, the point of this talk really is very simple. Last year, Scott McMorrow came and argued that you should bet your job. And I want to extend that and suggest that you should also bet your life. Thank you.